Welcome to the ACTS Reading Series. In April 2020, ACTS was supposed to host 4 New Brunswick poets here in the ACTS Gallery as part of National Poetry Month. But of course the pandemic hit, so we had to change direction. Instead, we invited the poets one at a time here to the ACTS Gallery to offer readings and have conversations with Dr. Sinclair, acting as moderator. Sue is a poet herself. She has written 5 collections of poetry, and her most recent, Heaven's Thieves, won the Pat Lowther Award. Sue is also editor at Brick Books and the Fiddlehead Literary Magazine, and she teaches creative writing at UNB Fredericton. I hope you enjoy these readings and conversations, and I appreciate your patience as this technology is new to ACTS and we're figuring it out as we go. Thanks very much and enjoy.
So, welcome Vanessa Moeller to the ACTS Arts and Culture Center. Nice to have you here.
Nice to be home.
Even at like 6 feet of distance here. So for anyone who doesn't know, Vanessa Moeller is a second generation German Canadian. She has an MA in English and Creative Writing from UNB, which is where I teach, so we're always glad to claim Vanessa as ours, to our credit. She's published in literary journals across Canada, and she has a book of poems called Our Extraordinary Monsters, which I believe you're going to read from, which came out with Signature Editions. She's won the Atlantic Poetry Prize. She also works on translations of poetry from German into English. And these days, she's living in Moncton. Did I get anything wrong?
No, that was perfect.
Right.
Yeah. Good job.
So I thought that we would, talk a little bit, read some poems, talk a little bit. But I've been asking all the poets about their experiences with the pandemic as poets. So has it affected your poetry life, either the writing side or the reading side? Or in a more like conceptual way, what do you think poetry can do for us in these moments?
I think it was kind of interesting because some of the work that I'm working on right now had to do with sort of environmental issues and how people interact with the environment and how we maybe don't give it the respect it needs or realize how we impact it. So the fact that the pandemic kind of grew out of this animal-human interaction, kind of showing how unbalanced everything is, I think was kind of interesting. I think, strangely for me, I think I've actually, instead of reading full books of poetry, I've been going back to poems that I really loved in the past to kind of like feel a sense of comfort. Yes. But I've been reading a lot more fiction and like trashy fiction, and it's been very enjoyable just to kind of like...
I think Jennifer was saying something similar, that she was going back to things that were familiar. I think it was Jennifer, and saying that similarly, that it was like she didn't feel ready for the challenge of something where she didn't know what was going to be coming at.
Yeah.
It was like definitely the comfort reading.
Yeah, absolutely. I went back to like, really early poems that I remember loving as a teenager, and kind of, it was really interesting to come back to it and be like, look at it now versus teenage Vanessa versus 40-year-old Vanessa. So, yeah.
When and?
It's
Do you still love what you loved at 14?
I still, like, one of my absolute favorite poets is Karen Connolly. Like, Karen Connolly is one of the poets that I can say for sure, reading her work in my teens made me want to be a poet. And I had this absolutely glorious experience with her at the Fry Festival, where we actually had lunch together with my mom, and we talked about sex toys. So I have this like amazing memory of Karen Connolly.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, it was one of those surreal moments where, this person that you've always like held on this pedestal, you have this like really surreal experience with, and it was just wonderful. And I, like, going back to her work, I still totally love it. So, yeah.
Interestingly, yeah, she was, when I sort of started thinking that, yes, I want to be a writer and talking to people about it, she was one of the first
people that I was told to read.
Oh, yeah.
But it was the travel memoir. What's it called again?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, that
one. So I don't know. Would you like to read a couple of
Sure.
poems?
I'm actually. It's going to be a bit of a cross section of work.
Yeah.
It's going to be a call out to a lot of women in my life, with a small call out to Alan Cooper, because Alan's awesome. So I'm going to start actually with some a series of poems that was put out this year in an anthology called Harbor. And Amy Ash, who's an artist, actually put this together. So she had put together a show of, she says by accident, it ended up being all like female artists. And then she asked a bunch of other writers and people that she knew wrote to contribute some work. So I actually sent her some stuff. The idea of Harbor is obviously a very vast kind of, could mean many, many things, and it does in this collection. So I was actually lucky enough to have, I think each section of this starts with one of my poems. And I picked this one just because it's one that I really love, but I've never really read. It was like sort of an orphan that lived in its own for a while, so I thought it would be a nice little thing to start off with. So it's called Circumnavigation, a Sequence. 1. In Tibet, people write prayers on thin scraps of paper, release them into the wind, and watch them sift upwards through the layers of air until they look like small snowflakes against a jagged horizon, rising back up to the sky, falling into the hands of God. Unaware that across the mountains in a village of Bhutan, people celebrate the season when bleeding blessings rain down from the sky. 2. In Andalusia, there's a legend of a mute boy who could touch his guitar and make it echo with all the stories he could never tell, inciting the beautiful girls to dance passionate flamencos. So enticingly, the villagers began to suspect the boy was in league with the devil. The archaeologists cannot explain the single pearl in the mouth of a boy whose arms cradle a broken guitar that still has one string intact, a string that lets out a mournful cry as the wind skims across it. 3. A lost tribe in the Everglades believed the soul was contained in 3 places: your eye, the shadow you cast, your reflection in the water. A young girl places her hands into the warm water of her bath, runs the liquid along her fingers, staring at the reflection of the gold flecks in the green of her iris, not noticing the shadow beneath her slightly bent knee. 4. A Japanese princess, believing the world was at its end, had hundreds of scholars write down their wisdom on strips of silk, which were placed in small wooden representations of the universe and buried throughout the islands of the empire for whatever souls might rise from the ashes. An old woman leans against a case, the moisture of her palm spreading across the glass in the Grand Palais in Paris, marveling at the delicate calligraphy stained into the silk, unable to understand what it is trying to tell her. 5. An alchemist discovers the secret of making gold. In love with magic, not riches, he finds a way to trap his secret in a conch, which he throws into the ocean. A boy wanders the beach of his island home and finds a shell half in sand, wet from ocean, lifts it to his ear and the tides fade away. The voice of an old man whispering chemicals and temperatures in a language the boy has never heard sounds like a strange poetry. 6. The monsoon season is celebrated in India, and when the rains flood the gutters, children make paper boats of the brightest colors and watch them float away forever. I've wandered too far, a saffron boat beneath my barefoot, folds collapsing in on each other, but I can only feel the rain falling along my face. So I was going to actually follow this one up with a newer poem. And I would say sort of in this pile, this would be more my, I think it's a normal thing for poets to be kind of magpies. And we're constantly like looking for facts and weird little things. And I love that, like I absolutely love that. So this one grew from the realization that I actually had never lived a day without there being footprints on the moon. And the fact that the only footprints on the moon are all male. And it kind of really ticked me off. I don't know why, but it does. The poem doesn't actually have a lot to do with that other than the title. So, I've never lived a day without there being footprints on the moon, a fact that makes me prefer the nuanced truth of stories. An old woman stares past the camera, says in Italian while the English caption translates, "I've fallen in love with a dead person." A little boy who doesn't want his mother to fall asleep before him because I won't know where you are. The ghost of a woman who hailed a cab in Japan and when told the place she wished to go was flattened by tsunami, asked, crying, "Am I dead?" These accounts help me accept the fact that I don't need a valley, I don't need to shout for everything to echo back.
The magpie thing kind of resonates with one of the things I was thinking about asking you, which was that our extraordinary monsters is kind of littered with epigraphs. And I feel like perhaps that also speaks to the magpie spirit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, can you talk a bit about, I don't know, how it is that you have wound up with so many epigraphs in your work?
I think with that one, I think for the first book, it kind of makes sense because I think at that point you're still trying to find your own voice. There's a lot of people you look up to. So I think it was a lot of working off the work of other people, admiring the work of other people, and then kind of seeing, either being inspired by it or seeing how your work maybe fits against it. And even the title of the book is, is from an epigraph. It actually had, when it was a thesis, so if you go to UMB, the thesis name is actually Sane Love's Realm, because I couldn't come up with the name of it, and it's an anagram of my name. And it was just a total cop-out, but then I found that, and I was like, that's the perfect,
Do you want to read it?
Oh, sure. I actually do have my own book, but yes.
Well, it's open.
So we are ourselves, but we are also that extraordinary monster made up of bits of someone else's longing, memories, dreams, fears, needs, experiences, and hope. Alberto Mangel.
I loved it when I discovered, I probably shouldn't have been passing that to you. I'm
That's
sorry.
fine, it's fine.
In regular life zone here. I thought it was a terrific title, and I loved it even more when I read that and was like, oh, so then it's the extraordinary monster that I am. That's like a bunch of other people's ideas of who I am, and a bunch of, all the experiences of theirs that I'm like a little bit of a part of, and it's a beautiful picture of the self, and it actually fits with all the epigraphs.
Yeah, it did. It was a nice bit at the end, and I'm always curious, like, since I have you here, how do you usually come into titles for your work?
Difficultly. I mean, I have trouble with titles. I usually try to comb through the book and see if there's a poem title that will double as the book title. Look for that like resonant word or phrase that somehow maybe speaks to some of the overall concerns, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard thing sometimes, especially I find the book, because it has to be such a big thing. So yeah.
Yeah, like it's a container for so many different kinds of poems.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Although you have used dates frequently in this book, which seems like a very handy way of going about getting around the title issue. Yeah.
All right, so actually maybe I'll read from Monsters next. So I thought for this, there was a section that I actually wrote for my mom, which I thought ties well with everything that I'm going to read afterward, because it has more to do with like the female experience. I'm not going to read the German, just because I need to practice that a lot more, and I did not. And it was funny because I did a reading recently where I read the German and I practiced and practiced, and I just absolutely nailed it, and then totally screwed up the English. So now I'm a little paranoid. So I'm going to read this section, which is called Shaping the Frame, and it starts with an epigraph. We start out alone with our mothers in the womb, And we get to know them from the inside, internally. We grow our bones and our hearts inside our mothers, Lorna Crozier. And the first poem in the series, it's kind of all, when I was writing these, I was sort of re-examining my relationship with my mom, because my mom, I think it's normal for women to have a bit of an antagonistic relationship with their moms, but as I was writing this collection, my dad passed away during the writing of it, and it actually completely shifted our relationship into something much better. So this is kind of my love letter to my mom, I guess, to a certain extent. And I wouldn't speak German if it weren't for my mom. Like, she's the one who really kind of kept the language alive in our family. So the first poem is called Shaping the Frame, which is for my imagined daughter, and she has remained imagined because we've decided not to have children, and I'm totally okay with that. So, Shaping the Frame. To give birth to a small husk of storied molecules, my father's hands, my mother's eyes, my angle of jaw, and a curve of lip from a great-great-great ancestor whose identity is just beyond the long branches of the family tree fading in the sitting room. When my body begins to erode, age scuffing away my surfaces, you will begin to fully inhabit the chamber of your name, learn to siphon knowledge from the world and rearrange it to fit the nooks and alcoves of your character. Eventually, I will be disincarnated, reduced to flecks and wind, but you will read me again in the syntax of your own daughter's body, quixotic sylph who grows into the length of a spine that reminds you of teak. And then I think every poem after this has to do somewhat more with the idea of language and getting that mother tongue. So, growing the voice. My mother's voice is nothing like my own, which is wind and wet moss, where my vowels sometimes reveal my body's equine suppleness. My spine is a sentence that reads, I was never tall enough to write on the sky. The idea for paper grew from the bodies of wasps, while the idea for my life was written in a double helix script, a correspondence between bodies that led to my birth into the spaciousness of my mother's voice, its honey written on vellum cadences. Now I walk through the world with mirrors for eyes, carry a language of warmed amber in my mouth. So I will say there are some German words in the next one, and when I do read German, I like reading it because a lot of people think it's a very harsh language, and they're always like, oh, they make fun of the accent, and I actually find it a very lovely language. Mm-hmm. So I do try to read it just to convince people that it is a very melodic, lovely language.
A little German proselytizing.
Exactly. So this one is called Untying the Breath. When I was 6, I learned to unbraid my vocal cords, weave them into an angular pattern of English, instead of the familiar orbed syntax of German that had sheltered me since birth. My mouth hollowed by the absence of words like sanft and Mitternacht, left unable to explain Leidenschaft, since no translation fuses suffering and creation into a single word meant to express passion. Eventually, I learned to untangle the Gordian threads of breath and accent until my voice became cobwebbed enough to sift away the vaporous and leave only the gracile syllables and the definition of l'Ouest. Molding the tongue. I learned to grasp the language, to mold words that were metallic and thin as thimbles, sculpt sentences so they rested like long rivers down the length of my tongue, weighted down like silver coins placed there to make the crossing possible. Binding the wings. How, when I understood mortality, time became smooth black beach stones I carried in my pockets, while I read hagiographies, corseted in the narrative of lives where convictions lixiviated any trace of disbelief from corporeal forms. I no longer fear death, for I have faith that someday my body will dissolve, my arms will reveal they were never flesh, but a thick-fisted bundle of moths that will loosen and release into air. I guess I'll finish up with a series of new poems. So
Yeah.
you would not have seen these at all. So this
Excellent.
is like very fresh work. There was some, so this book, I'll do another little shout out. So Kayla Geitzler and Elizabeth Blanchard did Cadence, which is also female New Brunswick writers. I believe you're in this.
I'm in that, yeah.
There you go. Shameless plug for Sue as well. So there's a couple of shark poems in here that have since evolved. So I'm going to read the new versions. So this is, yeah, as I said, my newest work. And I will also start this by saying that this work came from a fusion of two things. So I am a hardcore shark lover, which weirdly combined with the Me Too movement. So this is sort of the fusion of being in the bathtub, which is the very first line of this series comes from an actual moment, and then having these two things fuse, and then this series of poems comes from it. So get ready. So it's called, the series is called A Group of Sharks is Called a Shiver. 1. At night in the bathtub, I notice my labia are asymmetrical. The top of the right scalloped, like I lost part of myself without noticing. Its pattern makes me think of sharks, of how individuals are identified by distinctive notches along their dorsal fins. Sharks lack the neural machinery to perceive pain. The sensation has little relevance to their survival. We rely on pain to know our bodies aren't functioning properly, a way to limit damage. Maybe it is because sharks rely on violence to mate, the male latching onto the female with a bite, those bites becoming the scars later used to identify her in deep waters. 2. As the X-ray translated my clavicle into light, I wondered if there's a kind of dendrochronology found in our bones, a delicate circle, perhaps in a wrist, that records our shame. In sharks, time is kept in the spine. Each year, a new ring laid down in the vertebra. These cannot be seen on X-rays. They must be extracted, sectioned at low speed with a diamond saw, treated with chemical dyes to enhance visibility. Because time, like shame, can be difficult to locate. 3. Hunger is yearning made physical, and I wanted so much. Bones rose to the surface. Motherhood was stillborn inside me. Still, I refused to stop moving. Sharks have to keep moving or they die. Appetite they can shed. Female sharks stop eating before giving birth, a biological trigger to prevent them eating their young. But inside the womb, some pups are carnivorous. The first to hatch eats its siblings to survive. Sometimes the instinct is to put my mouth to a wound and feel the slow coy of pain swimming beneath. Sharks explore the world with their mouth, bite down to understand the braille of the world. When a human is bitten, it is almost always by mistake. Even then, it's not really the blood that's shocking. It's that light can suddenly enter where we least expect it. 5. When I first saw Jaws, it made me afraid, not of the predator, but that something could be so punished for instinct, for answering its hunger, how fear forges cruelty, how shark is not a synonym for killer, just like man is not an antonym for monster. So I guess we're coming full circle on the monsters.
Mm-hmm. That's nice.
So can I turn your question about titles back on you? Because you read a couple of poems that seem to be using like a fact for a title. Is this a new thing that you're trying out with titles?
I think it's more, I think sometimes that's where the jumping off point is, and then it just naturally was like, it just fit, it just kind of stayed that way.
Yeah.
I think sharks, I think I knew that. I think I had it first as Shiver of Sharks, and then it just kind of, the title changed, and it was just always, it always needed to be that. Like, it was just like one of those, that's the title and that's it.
Yeah, it works. The same with like I've never lived a day without I can't remember what it is,
Footprints on the
Footprints on the Moon.
Yeah, that still makes
It's
me
got
angry.
the same kind of
Yeah.
feel to it, like this. Like I'm going to tell you a really interesting fact, and then I'm going to write a poem.
Well, I think that's probably most of the time that's what sort of, you know, I think that's what poetry is. You're like deeply interested in all these little things like words and facts and, you know.
Genuine reflection of the process.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm struck by all the different things that you just did with the shark in that poem, and a lot of sort of pointing out the differences between sharks and humans, but in such a way that I also feel some overlap. I was struck by the shark bite that doesn't inflict pain, and that when they're mating, there's a lot of biting going on, and I'm just like, wow, what is it to like bite but without inflicting pain, or to be bitten without experiencing pain?
Well, it is actually how they do identify them. So they have like such large chunks get removed that they have, you know, they name them after the scars or,
I was going to say, it is in effect a kind of a naming, right?
It is.
Like an
which is really
individuation.
strange to think. So the males are very aggressive against each other, but for the mating, they literally like attach to either the fins or the side of the female, and that's how they mate. So.
And then I'm just wondering, like, so what is the female shark experience? Who knows? But that's where my mind goes, right?
Yeah, but I think that's why I liked it. Like, there's so many interesting parallels between being a woman and kind of like what we're looking at now with like the violence. Like, I think what was going through my mind at the time was sort of the violence against sharks, like the finning and whatnot, and then finding out how many of my female friends had gone through these terrible experiences that all came out at once, which, I mean, I'm thankful I didn't have any experience to that level, but then to find out that so many people that I loved had so much violence done against them, it was just, so it just ended up being this weird natural fusion between the two.
Yeah, I'm kind of happy that sharks didn't wind up as the killers, right? They so often, as the poem says, they get cast in that role. So I like that it wasn't an easy equation of man to shark to killer.
Well, and it's funny because like the last poem in the series is actually based on in the Sussex drive-in where I went when I was 4. My siblings are quite a bit older than I am, so they thought it would be good to take their 4-year-old sister to go see Jaws.
Yeah, right.
Which I was not frightened by. I was very upset because I thought he was very much misunderstood.
You were identified with the shark,
yeah,
even
I
at
was
4,
just like,
right?
he's just trying to eat. What's wrong with these people? However, I did go see E.T. and was terrified. So I still haven't watched E.T. Fun Vanessa fact.
Let's see. I have a lot of questions that I wanted to ask you coming out of your first book, but I don't know. Maybe you can tell us more about your interest in thinking about environments in the newer work.
Yeah, it's again, a lot of it goes back to facts, and I was actually thinking about it a bit with your question on beauty, if I can.
Sure, go
segue.
there.
Because I find what I'm interested in. I think when I was younger, I wanted to write quote unquote beautiful work, whatever that is. Like, I don't think now that I'm older, I would ever be able to give that a definition.
Yeah.
I think I'm more interested now in writing work that is beautiful in the sense of it sounds interesting or it has something that draws someone in, and then subverts that with like a kind of tension with like ugliness. Like Sharks does that a little bit. There's a lot of violence, there's a lot of like brutality in it, but I think they still sound quite lovely, and there's like lovely metaphors and moments in it. So some of the other things that I'm thinking about is one sequence I'm working on is about, I think it was a couple years ago, a woman, I believe in China, had 2 sweat bees drinking the tears in her eyes. So
Sweat bees.
Sweat bees. And I mean, obviously, the first thing you think when you hear that somebody has bees in their eyes is just like,
get them away, get them away.
Get them out. But then I started doing research, and they actually, they drink the tears, like they're attracted to tears or sweat. That's why they're called sweat bees, and they're tiny, and they often are found around gravestones, or cemeteries. So there's this beautiful parallel between this horrible thing that happened, but it's kind of a really interesting metaphor for mourning the environment too. Like all these things are happening that are just off, right? Like these bees shouldn't be attracted. There should be enough other things that they can eat that they're not going to crawl into someone's eye. So I'm interested in kind of this tension between taking things that are ugly or maybe uncomfortable and then wrapping them in poetry to kind of like create that tension between the beautiful and then things that maybe are disturbing a little bit or a little bit ugly.
As you were speaking about the bees sort of drinking the tears, I was actually thinking that there's something beautiful about perhaps grief being transformed into nutrition. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, there's, you know, if you go down, and I'm sure you've done this too, once you go like down a research rabbit hole, there's like weird mythology, like it's believed that the tears of Ra, the Egyptian god, fell on the sands and turned into bees. So there's actually weird connections all through history.
The tears and the bees are already connected there.
Yeah, and there's a lot of honey stuff too. Like apparently Alexander the Great, when he died so far from home, they just threw him in a vat of honey to get him back. So things like that.
Embalming fluid.
Yeah. Yeah, which you don't think of obviously with honey. You think of something like gold and sweet and lovely, not
right.
So
not preserving dead things.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the sharks. I mean, are the sharks beautiful?
I think they are. I'm totally into them.
Yeah, and when you were describing like the rings growing in the vertebrae and the sort of the way in which they contain time, I don't know why that seems beautiful to me, but it feels beautiful.
Well, it was one of those things where it's funny because sometimes you start writing things and then, I don't know if you have this experience, things find you. And you're just like, this is so strange, like how like all these synchronicities happen. And I was thinking, I think I had the line about like dendrochronology in the bones. And then I was like, what are the chances that this is actually a thing? And then it came up like that's actually how they age sharks, is they can do this. And I was like,
but you can't see it on the X-ray.
Yeah.
So there's like this insistence on something mysterious there, but there's something we're not going to get to the bottom of when it comes to sharks and time.
And it's hard to get to too, right? Like the shark basically has to be dead before you can age it that way.
Yeah.
Is another thing too. So yeah.
That seems sad.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of layers. So yeah.
Do you want to talk about sonnets a little bit, since you've got all these sonnets in here?
Let's talk sonnets.
All right, tell me about sonnets.
Sonnets are a terrible idea, especially when you tell yourself you're going to do a sequence of them that go from earth to sky. And then just a sonnet is an interesting box to play in, but then when you put it in an even smaller box, it becomes torturous, I guess.
So are you still friends with the sonnet at this point in your life?
I flirt with him, but I haven't dated him again.
Yeah.
I don't know, I haven't actually really done much with form since then. And I don't think it's necessarily like a conscious, like the shark poems are very much prose poems at this point. Like they're not really into line breaks for whatever reason, as poems tend to do. They do what they want to do.
Yeah.
I think if I did do something, I would do something probably with a different form.
Yeah.
And I wrote a lot of, I believe they're called guzzles, but I like to call them gazelles because I think it sounds more elegant.
Well, I also think about the leaping gazelle, you know? It just
Thank you, Sue. And I think I'd like to get back to that, like just that kind of like, there's something really lovely about that leap between the lines.
The unsayable is right there.
Yeah.
So if you care for the unsayable, it's bound right into the form. But in a way that it isn't in a sonnet form, I would.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like the sonnet, I think the thing that was interesting about the sonnet was it was frustrating because you have to fit it and you have to find the words, but then you start getting really creative with how things move or how slant rhymes start to come in and how you can kind of like get through it. And I'm happy with that sequence, like in the end, but I was also very happy when it was done. Like I was really like, yes.
Yeah. Did the rhythm of like the sonnet get into your body at some point, or the structure of it maybe?
Yeah, probably the structure. I can't even remember now if I wrote them all at once. Like I think I did maybe like 4 and then left it, but I'm too stubborn. I was like, no, I said it was going to be 10 doing these things, so I have to.
God damn it, it's going to be 10.
Which I think is one of a bad habit I have. Like I tend to put too many parameters at the beginning instead of like I'm trying to get out of that and just kind of let stuff breathe, because you can always put it into a box later, but it's hard. I find it's harder to let it breathe after you've shoved it into the box. So
Yeah, I feel like one of the better pieces of advice I got on writing poetry was to leave it flexible and open to change for as long as possible.
Yeah.
And that's been really helpful to me.
yeah, that's totally against my personality, but I'm trying.
Well, it seems to be working for you for our short poem is anything to go by, so.
Yeah, no, I haven't thought about the sonnets.
Yeah.
Surprised I didn't just break out into hives. Not sonnets.
You managed to do that trick of getting the sort of the language to move through its sentences in a very natural seeming way, while at the same time holding to this sort of rhyme scheme and
Well,
your
I mean,
14 lines.
I'm, it's sonnet in the sense of I don't think I keep iambic pentameter or anything like that. Would have just been, but I think it's a good exercise to do as a writer because I think it makes you respect the people who do it. Like Shakespeare, like everything's like perfectly timed and perfectly rhymed, and you're like, that's pretty impressive.
I see that. I see why that was good now.
Yeah. Well, I think I saw why it was good, but I think you understand the craft behind it. Like once you do it, yeah.
You get on the inside of the experience of actually composing that thing.
So I think for writers, I think it's a good experiment to like try some forms, which I'm sure you probably make your students do some as well.
Well, sometimes it's one of the options out there, let's say, that I throw at them. They seem quite interested in forms, so in some ways I want to pull them away from forms.
Oh, okay.
Because forms they can be safe feeling, right? Like I know that this needs to rhyme with this, and I feel like I've written a poem if it has this form.
And I will be done here instead.
Right. Perhaps, yeah. Yeah, so I think I'm trying to get them to, experience more of a negative capability. Of not knowing exactly where things are going, or at least offer it up as options. Anyway, I'm talking too much about myself now.
I asked.
Yeah, all right, perhaps we can leave it there then.
Perfect.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Sue.